Bow, da da da, da da da, bow, 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 bow. Oh man, I'm losing my voice a little bit right now. But hello and welcome to the AndyPlex Podcast, where we talk about movies we love with creatives. I'm your host, AndyPlex, and this is episode 50. Oh my goodness. Escape from New York. To ring in 50 episodes and 5 years of this podcast. Now fourpeeting, and who was my very, very first guest on the show 49 episodes and 5 years ago, talking about another John Carpenter film, The Fog, which was actually 1 year before, 1980s, to this year's 1981 action sci-fi epic starring Kurt Russell, Donald Pleasance, and Isaac Hayes. Escape from New York is Philip Gawthorne, screenwriter, podcast extraordinaire, my friend.
Andy, thank you so much for having me back, and thank you for that terribly kind introduction. It really is like a lovely, there's a lovely sense of a cyclical feeling to this, because you know you got me started with the first podcast I ever did was on your show on the first episode doing The Fog, and you know you've been kind enough to have me back a few times, and you know you've been on our show, and you know it's great, and it's 5 years as well to the month.
You believe it?
So
you reminded me of that fact.
There's a nice sense of you know serendipity to this whole thing. So thanks for having me back. I'm excited to. It's always a delight to see you, and I'm really excited to talk about this movie.
I am too. I am too, and I know you do. And I feel like we kind of had a telepathic moment, which we've had many.
Yes.
Over the years, now being friends for 5 years.
Yeah, and we'd only been friends for like 5 minutes when we recorded the first episode.
Yeah, that was the first time we hung out outside of meting, right?
Right, I think it was. Yeah,
you came over. We're like 2020. This is the year, guys.
Yeah. Nothing bad will happen.
we're gonna get to where we want to be. Everything's gonna be great. And then the world came to a screeching halt. And honestly, if I may, this year had been a bit awkward coming into January. We had fires here in Los Angeles. And we were set to do Falling Down, 1994's Joel Schumacher Falling Down, which is a great movie. But it's kind of a movie about L.A. not being on fire, but it's very hot, and that kind of pushing a certain individual, Michael Douglas's character, over the edge. And it's pretty tragic, because literally falling down, kind of his tragic fall. And I do want to cover it at some point. I know you do, and I know you love that movie as much as I do. But you said, let's do something a little more fun. And then I thought, man, maybe a Carpenter to kind of tie it into being the fifth, because you reminded me that it was the fifth. I cannot believe it. Just kind of keep doing it. There have been times when I wasn't doing it all the time. At first, I was doing it a lot in 2020, and I was sitting around in my pajamas, and I was like, the whole idea was the AndyPlex. You come here, you watch the movie on the wall, you know. But then, you know, the pandemic happened, and we didn't hang out physically for a while. So it actually was pretty fortuitous that it evolved into a remote setup, which I was able to do. And now I think it makes more sense to watch the movie on our own time with the guest. And
although I do miss that, it's just, I think my son hadn't been born. Now my life's very different, so I don't quite have the luxury of you know, time is so much.
Let's hang out for 12 hours.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, as much as I would love, because that was such a cool thing to come and watch the movie in the Plex and then do the Plex with the Plex, Plex it all over the place. But yeah, I had to do my homework in advance for this assignment.
Yes, I know how much you love this movie. You presented me with a poster of it, I believe, when we hung out last year, and I'm so tickled and touched. It's in my room, and it's beautiful, and thank you so much. And I know how much this movie means to you, and it means a lot to me, too. And I think it actually grew on me over time. Where I've been a Carpenter fan for a long time, and we can talk about this more later. But this movie has actually inched its way up in the canon of Papa John, of JC, John Carpenter, and now it's in the upper echelon for me. And I really want to talk about your love of it, and I have some questions for you, Phil.
Okay.
But firstly,
Yeah.
some housekeeping. This is your 4th episode of the AndyPlex. You now have the second most episodes of anyone besides myself. Being
Okay,
the host
I was
of the
wondering
show.
who beat me, but it was you.
Yeah. So 4 episodes, and every time I have you, I'm like, let's have him back immediately. I just I love talking to you about movies. I feel like it's kind of like English class, but like the cool English teacher that let you kind of like act out the scenes.
Call
from
me
Hamlet.
Phil. Call me Phil. As I roll up my corduroy jacket, like sleeves.
Yeah, exactly. But last year, you brought me on your show, Die Hard on a Blank. Actually, now you have another show, which we'll also talk about. One thing at a time. Die Hard on a Blank with your co-host, amazing co-host, Liam Billingham. Shout out. I love you guys so much. I love your show. Such a big fan.
Thank you.
And before you even started doing it, you said, Andrew, I want you on. And you had a list of movies with Die Hard DNA in it. And I still cannot believe that we're circling some other titles. We're like, let's get you one you like, Andrew. And I was like, okay, cool, yeah, maybe True Lies, whatnot. And then you were like, Star Trek First Contact. And I was whiplashed. I thought, oh my God, wait, oh yeah, it is kind of a siege. And yeah, Captain Picard's kind of the Bruce Willis character, kind of, okay, the Borg taking over the ship, it's kind of like that, and Nakatomi Plaza. Oh my God. And my favorite movie of all time, Star Trek First Contact. I was like, oh my God, it really does have Die Hard DNA in it. And I was so blindsided that you had landed there. And then I said, okay, Phil, I know I'm in the top echelon on this movie. And you bringing me on last year to do it was one of my greatest moments in podcasting or in any kind of entertainment at all in my entire tenure, period. Podcast or not. Yeah, it was so great.
That's great to hear. Well, the episode turned out great, and there was no one else that would be more suited to talk about that movie. So it was a pleasure to have you on and get all your expertise. And it was a new movie for me. I'd actually never seen it, but actually it was
really fun to see your guys's.
It was cool because we were all at different places with it. I think Liam had seen it once
Liam
or twice.
had seen it and watched
you were
Next Gen.
A die-hard fan, and I was completely fresh to it. And but it was actually people on the internet that were like saying, "Are you going to do Star Trek First Contact?"
I remember you sending me those.
So
yeah.
it all again. There's this weird sense of serendipity that these things tend to work out in a lovely way.
Yeah. Oh man, it was so cool. Well, anyway, yeah, go check out Die Hard on a Blank. And now, not only having one regular podcast, you now have 2 regular podcasts, 48 hours of buddy movies, correct?
That's right. Yep.
With co-host Liam.
Yep.
And you guys have, you have the DNA. You've really got me on the DNA.
Yeah.
Using the word DNA, the DNA of this and that. So these guys analyze forensically the DNA of Die Hard in the Die Hard show. And then they go through you started with Die Hard and then you chronologically move forward. So, and now you're doing it with 48 Hours.
Yes.
Which is an amazing film.
So the concept of Die Hard on a Blank is essentially we start with Die Hard as the kind of big bang, and then look at or the first one in the sort of genealogical tree, and then explore how it's branched off in all these other movies. I'm mixing metaphors horribly there, but you get the idea, right? So the DNA of Die Hard, appears in all of these other films of. Passage 57 and Under Siege and
I love those episodes.
True Lies and
I think my favorite episodes are the movies that are kind of like little bit of guilty pleasure. Anyone could be like, oh, I love Die Hard, and you can walk into here we are in LA, in film circles, film nerds, hardcore film nerds, and you could be like Die Hard, but saying you love Passenger 57. But you guys go under the hood.
We go pretty deep on it.
It's awesome.
It was always important for me that it was chronological because then you're tracing those links over time, and you're also seeing how culture changes and the film industry changes. So for me, rather than hopefully when the thing is completed, rather than it being one of many movie podcasts, it has a bit of it will have some kind of meaning in its totality because we'll have sort of historicized the influence of this one incredible action film and how it's been replicated in so many different ways, and sometimes in ways that are quite subtle. Like you might think a film like The Fugitive that we've done, like what's that got to do with Die Hard? But as you say, we get under the hood and we kind of find actually there are often quite significant connections, whether it's personnel involved or often like story shape. And as a screenwriter myself, I'm fascinated by the science of storytelling and structure and all of that stuff. So I love talking about that. So that's the Die Hard on a Blank kind of format, and we have fun with it, and we do, you know, the Hans Gruber Award for stealing the film, and the Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the movie, and things like that. You know, so we have a laugh with it as well as kind of forensic analysis of it. And essentially, it's the same format with the new show, which is 48 Hours of Buddy Movies, which is our Patreon subscription feed. So it's patreon.com/48 Hours of Buddy Movies with the numbers 48. And we start with Walter Hill's 1982 masterpiece, 48 Hours, starring Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy, with the thesis being that it's essentially the definitive quintessential modern buddy movie. There were antecedents to it, of course, but in the modern era, everything traces back to that, whether it's the Lethal Weapon movies, the Beverly Hills Cop movies, the Bad Boys movies, Stakeout, Point Break, The Hard Way, Training Day, all of these movies. We run the gamut. We even do some sci-fis. We'll be doing Alien Nation that I love, or Dark Angel, the Dolph Lundgren like cult classic, and we do it. There's a few wild cards in the mix, but essentially it's like the same format, and we also have fun awards on that one. My favorite one at the moment is the Best Fit Award. Like we'll look at the outfits and who, whether male or female, who has the kind of coolest outfit, and a lot of these movies are really, they've got some amazing fits. So again, it's that mixture, hopefully, of like insight, but we have a laugh with it, and Liam, wonderful partner in crime on this journey.
Yes, you guys are so good together, and I love doing the Die Hard show with you both. And yeah, it really was cool how we were kind of a triad on Star Trek, and you coming in as the newcomer, him having some, and then me being the hardcore. I thought it really lent itself to just an incredible convo. And yeah, so you guys, sometimes it's just you, and then you have guests, and I just think the setup is so strong and so cool, and so you guys, and
thanks, man.
Kudos to, and you guys just hit 50, right?
We just hit 50. Our 50th episode ended up being The Jackal, which was an interesting one. The Bruce Willis, Richard Gere
that's a
movie. And that was a fun 97? One. 97, because, and this rarely happens, generally we're on the same page, but in that one, like, Liam really doesn't like that movie, and I love that movie.
Oh, interesting.
So we kind of like give a sort of prosecution versus defense,
like courtroom, that's great.
Of those things. And there is one I wanted to tell you guys about, because we just recorded one, if I may,
please.
And then I'll put the plugs away. But this one we just did. Speaking of the timing that we're doing this, and the fact that we pivoted, because Falling Down just didn't feel like the right vibe, right? So we wanted to do something a little bit more optimistic. And the schedule, because these things are all essentially locked in chronological order, we just recorded Armageddon, and which is part of the disaster movie lineage, which Die Hard traces its origins to, with Towering Inferno. And our guest is Brad Payton, who is the director of San Andreas and Rampage.
Oh my God.
He's been on the show once before.
Cool.
He did 12 Monkeys, but this one was much. I really wanted. I know Brad quite well for a few years, and I really wanted his insight on disaster movies.
Yeah, but
it also came at a time when we were all collectively dealing with a disaster.
Like this too on the nose now.
But in that which could have been a problem, but it ended up being an incredibly inspiring and uplifting conversation, because it was sort of about how movies can sort of Armageddon. It's like quite an aspirational movie, and his insights were so interesting, because he was sort of saying essentially these movies are about a virtue that you aspire to. And in Armageddon, it's like the idea of what we wish we could all be unified,
right? To come
around
together,
a single goal
to save mankind.
To
save the earth.
It ended up being like it was such an inspirational conversation, and I genuinely feel like it's one of the best episodes we've ever done. So that's like the high bar for what I hope to achieve with the show, especially with a guest of that caliber who has
so cool, Phil.
directed massive
Big
movies.
Movies that have been in the theater that people know.
And made absolute tons of money, been very successful. San Andreas, one of the best disaster movies of recent times, in my opinion. So he knows he knows what he's talking about
got the formula.
Of blockbuster filmmaking, and his insights as to what is important with a disaster film were really powerful. It was a great conversation. So that one, I don't know if that will be out when, I think that's our next one to drop on Die Hard on a Blank. So it's just one, if someone's new to the show, that's a great one to
crack in,
to crack in and give you a sense of what we're all about.
Yeah, I'll have the link to the show in the description of the episode. But yes, Die Hard on a Blank. I can't recommend it highly enough. And if you're a Star Trek fan at all, want to check out the First Contact episode. But that is so cool, Phil. I did not know that, and congrats, kudos. It's just so cool to. I use the term "get under the hood" a lot on my show, but like I love getting into the nitty gritty about it. Like, what makes it good? What is it about these movies that stick to the ribs? Why are we still talking about them?
It's an apt analogy, because I often use the term. I'm developing stories right now, and I'm developing like 3 screenplays that I'm at various stages with. And I was saying, use this expression like on 2 of them, the ignition isn't turning, the engine hasn't kicked in yet, and there's a story engine that you need to propel.
The frame, the tires are there.
Yeah,
maybe there's
but it needs to have
wiring.
fuel. It needs to have fuel, and the idea of like the mechanics of storytelling and how all these parts work together, to me is like, that's what I spend most of my time doing. Yeah. So I'm fascinated by it. So I think that analogy is apt.
So let's now turn the lens onto the great, the wonderful, the reason we're all here, besides to talk to Phil Gawthorne, which is why I'm here. Escape from New York, 1981. It's now sat and has been sitting to be for now 44 years. 44 years of this film. For you, Phil.
Yes.
Let's make this completely opinion, if you want to use any factoids, whatever, to substantiate. But I think greatness is a testament to an individual's relationship with the film. Why do you think it's still relevant? What things do you think they were trying to do then that are still resonating now? This is like too big of a question, probably.
No, not at all.
Just for you, Phil. And you can also segue into your relationship with this movie in general, where you see it as a screenwriter. Does it inspire you?
Well, the first question is, why is it so resonant 44 years later?
Yes.
A few thoughts on that. Beyond the fact that it's an incredible... It's, in my opinion, it's the second best premise of all time. The first one being there's a bomb on a bus. Once the bus goes above 50 miles per hour, the bomb is armed. If it drops below, it blows up. I
remember you guys talking about it on the Speed episode, which is such a good episode.
Yeah, that I think is the best premise of all time, and this to me is a very close second. The idea that in the future, crime has reached such rampant levels that New York is now a prison. The president's plane crashes, and in order to get him out, they have to send the most notorious criminal to go and get him. Like that, that's just a absolute genius. Who would come up with that? John Carpenter, right?
John Carpenter.
Someone who just looks at the world differently. Now, what was really so that's the first thing on this sort of storytelling level. It's just an extraordinary idea, and it has an extraordinary and unique character at the center of it. I think why it's still so relevant, or why it's endured. Most of John Carpenter's early work has endured, I think, because it is so singular and it's so it breaks a lot of rules, and it's they're so imaginative and original. Even though you can see some of the things that might have influenced them, put through his blender, they all feel like truly distinct and individualized pieces of art. Not to obviously it's collaborative, but he's ultimately
he's the auteur.
He's the visionary, right?
Yeah.
The reason it also is so relevant is because it's about fascism.
Yes.
Right? It's about an authoritarian government, a police state where there's no dissent tolerated. It's deeply inhuman. And it's about one guy trying to transcend that oppression. And it's interesting because, if you know the history of the project, so it was sort of written in the post-Nixon era.
Right, the Watergate, post-Watergate.
Post-Watergate, where basically it's sort of like there's now, and you see this with the character of the president, right? Deep suspicion of, executive power.
Upper echelons of government.
Especially, and everyone feeling essentially quite depressed. They were depressed. I'm saying this broadly as making historical sweeping statements here, but this is my opinion, right? He's saying, basically most Americans are pretty depressed after Watergate, and they've lost a sense of faith in the executive. Then you have Jimmy Carter comes in as a fresh breath of fresh air, and sadly we just lost.
R.I.P. I was going to say,
Carter, who was a wonderful, wonderful man and a real beacon of light in a dark world. But President Carter, as a president, didn't have the best run of it, and I think was a really good man. But it was also an economically depressed time, and he has the famous quote about malaise that had affected America and all of the rest of that. And then there was the hostage crisis, right, which John Carpenter talks about on the commentary as being significant, and how that was a sort of black cloud over the American psyche for several years, and it was also a sort of, from a foreign policy and national security standpoint, a humiliating episode because of there was a very tragic incident that occurred with the attempted rescue mission. And there's a book about this called The Guts to Try, where basically they were trying to do a commando raid, and there was staged out of the desert, and 2 American aircraft crashed. I think it was actually they hadn't even taken off necessarily, but it basically blew the mission. It was bad luck so much. It sounds like it was like ineptitude, but if you read up on it, it was just like a perfect storm of misfortunes, and it blew any sense of the covert operation, and it led to exacerbating a very tense crisis, and it was a foreign policy humiliation for America, who are already dealing with the echoes of Vietnam and so forth, right? So in that climate, this story is cooked up, and it's made in 1980, where we're heading into a kind of new era, Reaganism. But this is why I find this film so interesting, because it's sort of at the intersection of the 70s and the 80s. It's like a combination of the 70s cynicism about executive power and government, which you see in all of those paranoid conspiracy thrillers, The Conversation or Parallax View, or yeah, absolutely, yeah, all those kind of movies that are basically deeply suspicious of the government and state power, and so it has all of that in it. It has that it has the sort of feel and look of like a grimy early 80s exploitation movie, but it has the action component and kind of weirdly aspirant quality of what would follow in the rest of the Reagan 80s, with an action hero that's super dynamic. And we talk about how this has some, Die Hard has probably some Escape from New York DNA in it.
Yeah, right? DNA, yeah.
And absolutely. There are buddies in it too, although it's certainly not a buddy movie, but it's an ensemble movie where there are other characters that help.
Forced really, into this buddiness.
It's an Odyssey movie as well, right?
Right.
So I think, but to me in this age, and I don't want to get on a soapbox, and we all know what we're talking about here, but we're in an age where in America, the specter of an authoritarian crypto-fascist government is very real. And these things, as we're saying, they sort of move in cycles. So, came out of post-Nixon, but we're seeing we're dealing with all the same concerns, I think, societally. So and it's interesting that so many of these 80s movies predicted this dystopian authoritarian government around this time. This movie is made in 1981, set in 1997, But the president in Escape from L.A. is very Trumpian.
Oh my God! Yeah.
You know, in
we might have to do a follow-up.
Quite a frightening way now, in a way that at the time seemed like, oh my gosh, that's so extreme, because I think he creates some kind of, like, he abandons term limits, and he's a total sort of authoritarian, dictatorial figure, right? So essentially, what these movies are about, and they pick a guy that isn't a white knight, they pick a sort of despicable, nefarious criminal who becomes the kind of middle finger to authoritarianism.
Yes.
Right. So,
and I think that's the catharsis of the movie.
Yeah.
A lot of the catharsis of the movie is seeing him. It's fun to see this guy say "F you" to the man all the way up to the climax where he replaces
and they
the tape.
all are, aren't they? Like, to some extent, like Brain and Maggie, and they sort of this rag in this movie, the kind of ragtag group Cabby. You know, they're all part of this, like, they're all these lost souls, damned souls.
Damned, yeah.
You know,
there's a
who
kind
don't
of a purgatory,
fit.
a hell. Right?
Well, he says, you know, the character of Houck, Bob Houck, the commissioner, played by Lee Van Cleef, says, "I'm ready to kick your ass out of the world. War hero. I'm going to kick your ass out of the world. This isn't even the world." And the fact that the line when Snake says, you know, he says, "Oh, the president's missing," and he says, "President of what?" Which is an interesting line, because it's like, I actually was trying to unpack it, because it's like,
I know, it really hit me this last viewing.
Yeah.
And I've seen this movie 50 times.
Well, what's your reading of it? Because I have my own kind of theory about it, because I think it's actually very
it's
critical.
It's one of those like Russian doll lines where I think I took it as its face value the first 49 times I watched this movie or whatever. I'm not literally counting, but I just think he's so out of touch. And it's like, president? Who's that? Like, I took it more as like, he's anti-authority. He doesn't care. He doesn't really. He's like, I don't care about your war. It has nothing to do with me. You know, there's a big war going on.
Yeah, they're also really very relevant. Yeah, we're still at war, relevant. Pliskin. He says.
Yeah, and he's like,
there's
I don't
a whole
care about your war.
off-world going on. There's a whole battle with what's implied to be like a Russia or Soviet state.
Yeah, and like China's involved.
And they mention Siberia as like a conflict zone in
and that's kind of the ticking clock, which you always, I know you're a big ticking clock proponent.
I'll get to that for sure.
Yeah.
This has the best one ever.
The best one ever. I know, literally the greatest ever in history. But also the president, it's like they need Pliskin to be, put a fire under his ass so that they can get the president to this peace conference so he can give this cold fusion or whatever it is, like science that they don't really go into. It's a MacGuffin, more or less. You know, we got to get this thing to the conference for the peace. So it has the larger implications of the whole world. The stakes couldn't be higher. I mean, we're talking about the whole world here,
right?
Not just saving the president for the president's sake. You know, he's got to get to this thing to save the country. So there's a lot at play, and I like that Pliskin is this war hero. And I honestly, this was the first viewing where I took that line as like, I don't know. I'm really. It's funny you say unpack. It really hit me.
It's actually quite complex, because I think there's also an element of it we could say it's like president of what, because what is the United States at this point, essentially? Yeah. Like within the world of Escape from New York, it's like, what is?
Yeah. What are you really
what
leading?
Is
or,
this?
What is this?
This is so.
Is this a country?
There's exactly, and there's also a sense of also that he just doesn't care about world events, or it's all kind of meaningless.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting that we never see, what does Washington D.C. look like in this world? What does
we don't see the
Boston
Pentagon.
look like?
Right.
Or Chicago? I mean, we see L.A. in the sequel.
Well, apparently New York looks like St. Louis. So.
Right, yeah, of course. But, we never... It's somewhat hermetically sealed to the geographical area where the film is set. But there's implied to be this giant other world that you can imagine is very dark. Yeah, not a nice world to be living in.
I mean, if you're using what would have been the biggest city in the free world, New York, as a prison,
right?
Then what does everything else look like?
And
it begs the question, right?
New York is supposed to be, and that's the irony and deliberate irony of the fact that it's the Liberty Island Security Control. Yes. Right? It's supposed to be the gateway to immigration and the American dream, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That is supposed to be.
My ancestors came here from Italy.
For everybody, and everybody starts sort of equal and is given the opportunity to flourish and succeed. And in this movie, it's saying, no, that's closed now. That's a prison. That if you really, I know beyond the sort of weird sci-fi coolness factor, there's actually something very disturbing,
very poetic,
darkly and
poetic.
Clever about the idea of New York specifically as well. That door's closed now; it's a prison, and all of this stuff is very. So, I think that answers the question as to why it's so resonant and relevant 44 years later.
That's amazing, Phil. Yes, I want to interject just a little here that. Ironically, we landed on Escape from New York as a fun movie because we didn't want to do Falling Down because of the fires in LA, and I'm with you. But then the more I think about it, it's like this dystopian movie. Now, I know we talked about this even in the First Contact episode, how, you're like, Andy, I remember this really stuck to the ribs again. Andy, you like the utopian elements of Star Trek, and I love that. And I've always come more to the sci-fi dystopian Blade Runner. But I think ultimately they're both there to make a point. By showing the horror of this dystopian world, well, I think at the end of the day, and I just watched an interview with Deborah Hill, and she says that she believes at the core of this movie is that we must protect the liberty of every individual. Yeah. So the Statue of Liberty, which is ironically the only actual footage of New York, right? The very first shot, which they blended in together with I think in Van Nuys, But that one shot where we see we pan off of the Statue of Liberty, but I couldn't agree more. I think this is such a positive movie in a dark way of showing if we let power get this far, if we let things get to that level, but it couldn't be more pertinent, and I really don't want to get too political with who our president is now. But I think whoever is the president, I think there is a fear from everyone that too much power in the hands of a few or one is horrifying. And
the president is supposed to work for the people.
Right.
That's sort of the whole American principle, right? So... this is all obvious stuff, and for me as a Brit, people might take issue with.
You're British,
I don't want to, preach or anything, but it is, you asked me the question as to I think why it's relevant, which I'm trying to answer
please.
In an objective. As an objective way as I can, but I think all of these movies that were made around this time. Running Man is another one I think of as well, or RoboCop, and or Blade Runner to some extent, although that was less about like government, more about corporations. But all of these things are
power in general.
Exactly. Well, unchecked power.
Unchecked power. The corporation gets too powerful.
Whether it's corporations or government is a dangerous thing, and that's what these films are exploring. And I think trying to they're doing it in a pulp fun way, but. It's got real foundational depth, and it is in some ways I think it might be one of his most political movies.
I agree, and I always say this the Michael Crichton line, the great Michael Crichton, who we lost. It's been 15 years already, but he said that all my movies, all my scripts, or all my books are a lesson, but I put them in a sugar-coated pill.
Right.
So that you're enjoying it. And I think Spielberg said the same thing with Jurassic Park. It's like you're actually getting a genetics lesson when you watch Jurassic Park. Mm-hmm. But you're not thinking about that because you're just having a good time. Mm-hmm. It's a popcorn movie. And I think the best movies for me, and I know you agree, are the ones that it's multi-tiered, where you're entertained on the surface. Yes, John Carpenter says this is actually a Western. It's the gunslinger. It's the anti-hero, like you said, the middle finger to establishment. In the fringes, society is kind of broken down, especially in New York, which is a giant prison. There's no law and order. I want to talk about the Duke in a little bit and how he compares to Snake. But yeah, I just feel like there is so much at play here that we could be mining, and they did it in a very effective way. And I liked how you said hermetically sealed, because I think they only had $6 million. Yeah. So it was such amazing, a big swing,
right? Yeah,
and such big world building with little money. I mean, I'm sure if they had someone said, "Here's $100 million," they'd be like, "All right, let's show DC, let's show blah blah blah, show the Pentagon." Maybe build the larger world.
But you don't need it. You don't need it. You don't want it. It's just that I like kind of 360-degree world building, even if you don't see it. I like the idea that the funny thing is, I don't know if you're going to touch on the deleted scene.
I was, but
Okay.
we can talk about it now, please.
Well, you've seen it, I assume, or do you want me to explain what it is?
I have only seen clips of it, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, there's a really fascinating deleted scene where you do see the extended world
Right.
a little bit, where you see Snake, and it's like 10 minutes. Snake pulls a bank robbery.
He says the first reel of the movie.
Yeah, with a cohort, and the bank robbery isn't sort of like an armed bank robbery per se. It's more like a burglary, like a heist. You know, they don't pull guns, and then they escape onto an underground transit system, which is apparently so elaborate that one system connects every major city in the U.S. So there's and I think they filmed it in San Francisco, where the BART was at its early stages of being developed or whatever. It's basically like a futuristic tube underground, subway, but it doesn't look like the griminess of the New York subway. It looks very, very sleek. And they're either trying to go to San Francisco. I seem to remember San Francisco being part of it.
Yeah, I think that's where it terminates, and then that's where they get caught.
Right, and then all of the sort of fascist military forces
Gestapo
intercept
guys,
them, and they don't. They basically surrender, but kill him anyway. I think, or attempt to kill. They kill his friend, and he ends up. Snake tries to save him, and can't, and ultimately realizes he has to. He's trapped and has to surrender. And they cut it out because John Carpenter was saying it was... The reason they had it was they wanted to show that Snake had some redeeming qualities.
Yes.
And in the end, the film's actually stronger with the fact that he doesn't have any redeeming qualities at all. But it confused people. And it's actually
he screened it. People were like, what is this about? Or
it's much cleaner and neater, and it also fits the tone better because it's all at night, all begins at night, the bus arrives, he's kind of mysterious. It's better, it's more effective that we don't know what he did. We don't need to know. He does spell it out. Hawk says, you robbed a federal depository.
Yeah, they give us what we need.
That's all we need to know.
Yeah.
Even though it's actually in a fantastic sequence. So there was a version of it that did that. But I suppose the point I'm trying to make is it did have it was more expansive, but it's actually more effective that it's just super focused on the New York area and this immediate reality. But great sci-fi. A line that's like, I heard you flew the Gulfire over Leningrad. That tells you, that's like one line. There's an entire world,
so much there.
War, that was going on.
Talk about efficiency in writing.
Exactly. So I love that kind of science fiction that feels like a giant world, but at the same time has a real focus to it. So just my 2 cents on that.
That's great. Yeah, I know. I have seen parts of that whole scene. I would like to actually see the whole scene. I don't know. But yeah, you get to see some of the world building, like you said, like robots, and they're kind of these robots that are on the floor. Like, running around, and we get to see some of that
security robots.
Yeah, the security robots. But ultimately, I just feel as if get right into it. I love that this movie is only like 90-some minutes. It's like 94 or 5 minutes, I think, with the credits. It's so lean. It gets right down to it. Within about by minute 27 or 28, we're like, he's in New York going for it, and then like the back hour is just wham bam, thank you ma'am, just crushing it, one action sequence and the next. The build up is so, the crescendo is so good and so tight, and it almost feels like it could be a play, even though it's a large ensemble of characters, and we've got this, we'd have to have sets on a stage of buildings overturned and whatnot, and but I love the anti-hero, and I feel like this was not the first use of the anti-hero, but a good use of the anti-hero. And you said he has no redeeming qualities, but I actually think that he does. But if we can talk about, do you know like Save the Cat?
Of course, yeah.
So Blake Snyder actually wrote a book about it. Saving the cat. It's like our hero saves a cat out of a tree. There's the moment that we, the audience, are on board with this person, because movies are a journey, and if we don't like this person, we don't care, and then therefore the movie sucks. So is there a moment for you that you were like, when do I love this guy? Why do I love him so much? Even if it's like fuck you to authority or whatever. And because we don't see that opening scene of him in action, we just get him kind of muted, sitting there at the desk, smoking, handcuffed, and everyone's like giving us off the page of like what this guy has done, what he's capable of. Is there a moment where you're like, I'm really on board with this guy?
Well, it's more, first of all, he's very competent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there is a line where he says to Hawk, he says to him, well, once we're in there, I won't be able to communicate with you, or there'll be limited communication.
You'll be on your own.
He says, he says, so I won't be able to rely on you. And he goes, no. And he goes, good.
Good. Yeah.
So I think that moment, because Hawk is such an authoritarian prick,
bureaucratic.
You kind of like him on some level. Like I think also the charisma of Lee Van Cleef.
Yeah, Lee Van Cleef, and then harkening the old westerns. I grew up watching the spaghetti westerns with him.
And there's also that coolness of in the expositional scene where they have the sit down, the fact that they were both part of different special forces units, and they both have the coolest names: Special Forces Unit Texas Thunder and Special Forces Unit Black Light. And there's this kind of cool thing of that they're both in another situation. They'd be both on the same side. They are on the same side in terms of the mission in this situation,
right.
But they're on completely different kind of
opposites of the coin,
philosophical and circumstantial, situations. But I think I've been talking about this a lot on Die Hard on a Blank recently. On Tarantino's podcast, which is great.
Oh yeah.
He was talking about The Relic, which we've also done, and he was talking about
I love how you guys covered that movie.
Yeah,
so awesome,
I love.
Man.
We do a lot of Hayam stuff.
So cool.
He was talking about how Roger Avary's daughter Gala used this expression about, I don't think such and such a character is particularly likable. And Tarantino's like, what is this likable shit? Who cares if he's likable? Is he interesting?
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm taking that. Add to long-term memory.
Yeah,
right.
That's great.
It doesn't matter if the character
not likable, but you're willing to. There's something about this. It's like a wagon that you're hitching yourself to. You're stuck as a viewer of this. You're stuck with this person and their journey. So yeah, Snake was. You could tell Snake was like, if they didn't put the capsules in him, which is great. They're deteriorating over 22 hours.
Yeah.
And his head would explode, just the size of a pin, just enough to blast the carotid artery. He was going to turn that plane around, and he was like, you can take that dream of turning that plane around and flying it the other way.
He already knew what he was planning.
Yeah, he's gonna. Yeah, and he's like, oh shit. So it's like he is a kind of corrupt guy, not a corrupt, but he's if anything, where I'm trying to go is he foils the corruption of the government and the bureaucracy with this kind of like, I don't care about you guys, but it's so much fun. And it's so compelling.
Well, he's really, really good at what he does. So that's all. That's also
like he's
subconsciously.
He's the best. He's the only one who can pull this off.
Yeah, like he can get out of any situation, no matter how much the odds are stacked against him. He's getting the job done, and he kind of has he doesn't really like. There's no self-pity as well. He doesn't portray himself as a victim.
No,
he doesn't let anybody sort of push him around beyond the fact that there's very little he can do with the government's boot on his throat in this scenario. So he has no choice. But beyond that, he won't give them any quarter. He won't give them any respect or deference.
Yeah, you can force me into this, but I'm not going to like praise you.
Or be like, oh, the president, like, oh, what a chance for me to be a hero again. He's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't give a fuck about any
of that.
Fuck all y'all, basically.
Yeah, basically.
He's like, I don't give a fuck. I'll do it because I have no choice. But he does get things done, and it's refreshing, I think, to watch a character that isn't super virtuous. The other thing I think that's part of it, and this is another thing that we've been talking about with characters such as Cyrus the Virus, or we just did Desperate Measures. With Michael Keaton. Which is where I'm going with this is this one was made in 1981, before the appearance of Hannibal Lecter in movies.
Right.
But the idea of the mysterious prisoner that's sort of wheeled in and is like a dog that you're worried it's a dog that's going to bite you.
Yeah.
Right.
Uncuff me.
Yeah.
I'm not an idiot.
Well, yeah, he's like, exactly. And he puts a gun in his desk, Halkin. He's like, it's all right. He's dangerous. I know. but because we don't know anything about Snake and we haven't seen him in the bank robbery, he's more mysterious and frightening.
The mystery of it, yeah.
If we'd seen the bank robbery, we know, well, basically he's just like an outlaw, and he's basically a good guy. Like it softens him a little bit. It's cooler that he just comes in hard as nails. Mm-hmm. And I think the audiences, and I've talked about this a lot, like movies like Last Man Standing or Westerns, audiences have a fascination with the outlaw because it gives them a way to vicariously live out the dark fantasy of what if I was like
rebelling.
That? Yeah. Well, the rebel, again, rebel without a cause.
Sticking it to the man.
He's totally rebel without a cause.
Rebel without a cause.
What are you rebelling against? What do you got? Like, that's Snake's attitude, right? Yeah. Anything. I don't give a shit.
Whatever.
You want to give me a cigarette? I don't want that fucking cigarette. He would just, he's a contrarian, right? We live in a world of rules and systems that have to be adhered to in order to function in the world. But these movies and these characters, especially the outlaws, give us permission subconsciously to experience a fantasy of what if you didn't care about any of those paradigms, systems, rules, regulations, and you just did whatever you wanted and said whatever you wanted. So I think there's an element of that that's like makes this character a kind of avatar for a shared dark fantasy that we all could tap into.
I love it. Yeah, even John Carpenter said, he's very anti-authority. If you look at a lot of his movies, especially the earlier ones particularly, but I think it continued on. And he's like, I think Deborah Hill said that Snake Plissken is a combination of John Carpenter and Kurt Russell together. And I actually like what I don't always realize or remember, because I think this was the first movie with Kurt Russell in it that I've seen. So I have now seen Elvis only in the last couple of years, but he was kind of known as a Disney actor. He was known, he was in Elvis, and apparently Carpenter really had to fight casting wise for Kurt.
Yep.
And they were like, "Can he play a badass?" And now it's like, it's all history. It's like, can he play absurd. A badass? Yeah, it seems absurd in hindsight.
Yeah. But they wanted Charles Bronson.
He killed it.
And actually, they were looking at Tommy Lee Jones.
Yeah, who passed on it.
Yeah.
And
who would have been great.
Yeah.
And did a movie called Black Moon Rising where he plays which is a Carpenter concept, where he plays a Snake Plissken-like character who's a thief, high-level thief, and it's an exploitation-y movie. It's kind of a cheap movie, but I really like it. But this was the perfect marriage of actor and part, and Kurt Russell, I believe, has said this is the favorite part he's ever played, and he must have played well over 100 parts.
Oh my god, yeah, he's still working, tremendously. I love him so much, and yeah, the work with him and Carpenter together, it warms my heart so much,
and quite
so good.
This is very different from McCready, and this is very different from Jack Burton.
Absolutely,
you're right. They're and Elvis, of course, as you mentioned.
There's a lot of stratification of.
There's range and diversification within the parts, even though they had these great collabs.
Actually, I feel like we've answered some of my questions premeditatively, which is great.
Well, while we're on that, then can I put the plug back in the wall for a second, because I just bringing up Jack Burton. We're about to do Big Trouble in Little China on 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. You might not think of that as a buddy movie, but it totally is.
It totally is. It totally is, man.
It's him and Wang, and he's the sidekick and doesn't know it. Jack Burton. So that was another reason why I forgot to mention that, because I thought, that bringing things full circle, the fact that we're about to do a Carpenter movie and such a popular big movie on 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. So and I've already prepped it. I can't wait to talk about that movie.
That's so cool, man.
It's such a weird movie.
It's such a weird movie, which kind of, I guess, I always just thought it was a big old hit, but I guess it wasn't. And then after that, he went on to Prince of Darkness and kind of went back to his indie roots, where it was much more contained and low budget. But that movie is just so much fun, and it's unlike anything else. I mean, I feel like you can say that about a lot of Carpenter films, but I think a lot of them have a kinship. I feel like that one is just... I mean, you got Kurt Russell, obviously, but other than that, it's just kind of out in its own tangential universe.
But it's night and day from this character.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. Even though he's it's on the edge
He's
of
a
society.
badass.
He's a badass trucker.
Yeah.
It's all in the reflex.
He's got the swagger and stuff. But it's a totally...
I feel like he's more John Wayne in that one, where here he's more Clint Eastwood.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I mean, that's oversimplifying it, but God, I love Kurt Russell.
Who doesn't?
Yeah,
He's
I feel
amazing.
like. Do you feel like do you think about this movie when you're writing your other stories all the time? Does it pop in?
It does, because I often do, because I write a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah.
And I like world building in my
Right.
stuff, and sometimes maybe like because I'm so interested in those kind of details, like how one line or one commercial, or like we're going to be doing RoboCop on 48 Hours of Body Movies, so I've been thinking about how those commercials, like the commercial for the game Nuke, or the commercial for the 6000 SUX, which is basically the Cybertruck.
It is.
Right?
It looks like it, dude. Yeah, it's crazy.
How those little touches spin you off into what this bigger world looks like. So I do think about Escape from New York as like the high watermark for world building, but at the same time, your analogy of the engine and stuff, the mechanisms inside it, the premise and the ticking clock, the things that make the movie work, and the pistons that fire are also impeccable and so well designed for a propulsive story, and the guy driving it is the coolest character ever.
He is, absolutely. Snake Plissken. That's great. Yeah, so the ticking clock, I mean, like you said, this is the best ticking clock ever. It's funny now when I watch movies without it, I can't always put my finger on it. I'm like, why won't this movie drive?
Why doesn't it work?
Why doesn't it work? Why don't I care?
Yeah.
And that's when you reach for the remote.
Yep.
And nowadays, reach for the mouse, or
whatever. Something that we look at, when we've looked at a movie that feels a bit rudderless, or doesn't have a motor, it's often because there is no ticking clock. There's no sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And this
why now? Why today?
Yeah.
Why this moment?
This has the best one ever, and such an original idea as well. Of like literally your arteries are going to explode and you'll die if you don't get this done by the second.
Yeah. Right.
Like I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that.
It's awesome.
It's just brilliant. It's such a brilliant, clean, and also, but again, it's indicative of the brutality of this system.
Right.
And even Hawk is a piece of shit to the end. When he's just got the president back and he's gone through hell and back to get him there, and Hawk's like, the tape, Plissken.
Yeah,
he's got 5 seconds, you piece of shit.
Literally got 5 seconds. He's going to die.
Like, what an asshole.
I know.
To the bitter end. Like, the tape, Plissken. Like, come on.
Yeah. But then
the guy's just pulled off a miracle.
Then he ended up messing with the tape in the end.
Yep.
Getting his last
laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, it might be the best, like, cherry or icing on the cake.
It's a dark, nihilistic ending.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as to your thoughts on this, because I was also, what the tape, as you said perfectly, the tape itself is a MacGuffin. It's so funny. It's such a funny, clever, like, piece of writing. But the tape, we only hear like one line of what's on this tape.
Oh,
it's some kind of scientific mumbo jumbo jargon, basically,
it's like
cold fusion or nuclear fusion or whatever. And I was trying to
solve the energy crisis.
It might be that, or there was one interpretation. I think that's probably the interpretation that it could be. Yeah, some kind of positive thing. There's also a version of it where I'd heard an interpretation that was like basically it was the US flexing that we now have more armament, so it was like a leverage thing. But I think it reads more that it's something positive. So in that sense, it is kind of strange that Snake is like basically fuck the world, kind of, right? It feels a little bit like that. It's like there's nothing worth saving almost. So it's quite... I mean, he gets one over but it's such a bold choice because it's like, and it's. I was watching it again, and that what's really great is when he asked the president, just all I want is like how you feel about it, and his answer is so glib and dismissive and insincere, and even Remy, the character of Remy, played by everybody's favorite Tommy Atkins, even he has a look on his face of like such disappointment in the president for the way that he answered the question. When all you had to do was just like be a human being after what you've just been through, and he just couldn't. He was a politician.
He was a politician through and through.
And
that's really well said.
And
that's actually bringing my next question about the president.
So anyway, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, no. So I just watched another interview with Carpenter, how he said that whenever he cast Donald Pleasance, he's like, I love Donald Pleasance. Halloween, brought him back as much as he could.
Prince of Darkness.
Right? Yeah. He every single time he brought Pleasance in, Pleasance would say, "Why? Why me? Why for this? Why?" It was like he had to pitch him.
Yeah.
Every time, and he sent him apparently a long letter. This was in the early '80s, before emails. So he had to write out a letter, an impassioned letter about how we really wanted to show kind of the comedic elements of this character, who ultimately we needed, and do it in a very subtle way. And Donald Pleasance, fantastic actor, incredible actor, who brings a lot of levity, even into Halloween, even in the starkness of watch that boy for 15 years. He would give these crazy speeches, but then the next minute, give a funny line and bring the humor into it. And I think you nailed it when you said we just needed this president to be a human, but he played it so well that he was completely a politician. But there's the moment where he blows away the Duke.
Well, that's such an interesting
and the humanity of him having the catharsis of blowing away the Duke.
It's amazing. That bit's amazing.
The Duke of New York.
Yeah.
number one.
And the sound of the gun as well. It's so sort of satisfying at that point in the story when you watch it the first time, because the Duke has tortured him and humiliated him and emasculated him, and he's gone through a sustained period of literal torture.
Yeah.
So you feel within the moment of that he's entitled to get his revenge,
and it's cathartic as the viewer to watch it
at the first time you watch it, for sure. But it's also like the optics of it are in the president killing a black criminal, right, like shooting him to death. Also, when you watch the movie more than once, you're also sort of like, that's pretty disgusting. And actually, that's what you realize. The president is disgusting.
He is.
If you're the president of that world and you allow a New York to be a maximum security prison, probably not the most awesome political thinker, right?
Yeah.
So
I didn't vote for him.
Yeah, you got to imagine and maybe he inherited that. Who knows? But it's still going on. So that's also part of the sophistication of the movie.
Yes.
Is that the president is a piece of shit
he's
in
not
this
a hero.
movie.
Yeah,
he's not a hero. He's
I think
not really.
Pleasance plays it really well, where he's not a buffoon. He's not a clown, all in all. But it's subtle. But yeah, I think you nailed it on the head, where you needed to be a human being for one moment, and he couldn't.
No.
And that kind of epitomizes him in general.
Yeah.
And the performance, fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah.
And it is funny at
unusual
times.
Because obviously he's a Brit with a slightly transatlantic accent.
Yes.
And I read or heard Carpenter saying that Pleasance came up with this whole backstory, that it was because Margaret Thatcher had kind of taken over the world and made America a colony again. And Carpenter was like, it was really interesting.
Reagan and Thatcher's
kid,
right?
I never used any of it. But Pleasance found a way in his own mind, and as maybe his actor's secret or whatever, to justify why him as a Brit was playing the American president, which was interesting.
No, I think there's a lot to be read. I mean, I think I kind of take it as face value that Carpenter just wanted Don Pleasance here. He wanted the great Don Pleasance, and he kills it. But there is another level, like, okay, we were originally a British colony. Now New York, which was kind of a gateway in, like you said earlier, the gateway into, for the immigrants. So we all came through Elstown. We all came right there, by Liberty Island.
It's also interesting if you think about that. As I say, I think it's probably not this deep, but the idea that British Empire once had its boot on the American people, and they rose up against it to create a freer, better nation. Right. So there is something quite, whether it was intentional or not, there's something quite interesting about the fact that the American president is British, because they were the oppressors of the American people before they fought for the freedom and independence.
Yeah.
Right.
Give me liberty or give me death.
There's something really
Poetic.
clever about that.
Yeah, there is something really clever about that.
This movie's amazing.
I know, it's so good. Let's do a podcast on it. It's so good.
We should talk about it. Yeah, we should talk about it more. Yeah, I mean...
let's talk about the Duke.
Okay.
How does the Duke... So you bring in Isaac Hayes, who is a terrific musician, has a great voice, and you kind of play him really subdued. Now, I almost thought, okay, your lead is a very subdued, very gruff, Snake Plissken, and then to foil him, usually you think you want to go the opposite way, but he's also very subdued, and he represents establishment within the anti-established colony. So it's Lord of the Flies in there, there's no rules, except for the worlds they create. I love that line. Jamie Lee Curtis, who's in the movie, kind of thinks of being the narrator. And then the voice of the computer, right, in the beginning. So you have this guy who's literally dressed up like a statesman of old.
Right.
A duke.
Or a sort of dictator from some kind of, Banana Republic type, right? Like, he has the little tassels on tassels. Sort of Gaddafi-esque or something like that, right?
Yes,
like,
exactly.
It feels like it's trying to evoke some version of... He's the dictator of this little principality. Yeah. And similarly to, those kind of dictators, rules with an iron fist.
Right.
Through violence.
And
that's how he controls, and they follow him, like in the Madison Square Garden scene and stuff like. Yeah. They get commands, and that he has followers.
Yeah.
So
he's a leader.
Yeah.
They hang on to his every word. He made the whole room packed with guys. Be quiet. At first there was almost this kind of zombie horde element when he first gets in there. They're coming out of the ground, and there is a kinship with Assault on Precinct 13.
Yes,
which you and I saw together in 23 at the Alamo Draft House. That was such a great day, and that movie rocks. And was it Napoleon? It was. They even said it was very proto.
Very much so. Yeah.
Snake.
Very much so.
In Assault, you get actually the guy with the spiky hair. What's his name?
Frank Doubleday.
Yeah, Frank Doubleday.
The character's called Romero,
which I think is a nod
named
to
after
George.
Because there's another character called Cronenberg.
Yeah, I know.
Who's great and appears in The Fog, cleaning up the store at the beginning. He was like Carpenter's neighbor or something.
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool. You're sending nods to fellow horror auteurs. That's so cool. Well, anyway, so apparently he was in Assault and he's back here, but there's this kind of like zombie horde. Yes.
I just had to do it. I love a maniacal laugh. So
that was actually really good, Phil. You practicing?
I didn't.
Work on the shower.
I just feel very seen by Romero. I think he's an amazing character. And of course, he has that sinister part in Assault on Precinct 13, who's horrendously evil. Sorry, but go ahead.
No. That's all part of it. So you get this, again, so much world building so quickly. You get these kind of like this zombie horde element when he's first getting in there, this creeping in the shadows, the way they frame it, bursting out of the ground, coming up. There's a subterranean versus, the above ground. And then you do get a little bit of focus with a couple of villains, Frank Doubleday, Romero, and then the Duke. But it was only this last go where I was like, the Duke has a very quiet reservedness to him that is very parallel with Snake. And they're kind of very opposite ends of the spectrum. I didn't know if you picked up on any of that, and if you want to add anything to that, or if you think that's a factor that they really weighed out. Like, why bring a singer in to kind of just...
I don't know. Isaac Hayes has a kind of like gravitas to him, and a kind of, he has a power to him without having to do much. And he has a charisma as well, which you need as a sort of dictators. They need to be charismatic, even if it is a sort of low key charisma. But sometimes silence can be as powerful as a weapon, to intimidate and so forth. So I think he has a kind of... I think it's really, really well cast because everyone has a different sort of energy, with Brain, Maggie, Cabby, the girl in Chock full of Nuts, in that sense of that being an odyssey, and you meet this character for a few minutes, or some of them go along on the journey, but they all have a different sort of flavor, if you like, a different vibe, but yet they all feel they live in the same world somehow. They're all that slightly heightened, slightly graphic novel comic book, but they're played by actors. You know, someone like Harry Dean Stanton, who's very natural. You know, it all feels grounded. You know, it doesn't feel. I mean, Romero is definitely like the most outlandish character, but it works because the world is so weird. But then some of the other people inside it just actually do feel like that you are a functioning human being. You might have no moral code and could be completely, you know, but it makes this super outlandish pulpy world feel real.
Yes, the texture.
Because you just believe that the Duke would have this place in his grip. You know, he just has some kind of like he has Riz.
Yeah,
you know,
he's a warlord.
He's a warlord. Yeah.
He has Riz for sure.
Yeah,
I still get the catharsis when the president blows him away.
Yeah, because he's evil and awful.
He's evil. He's become it's
a monster.
It's a cyclical nature. Like you're in this outlawed place where you're a prisoner, but he rose up. And he's just becoming the new state power that's unchecked within that dome.
Yeah.
So it's just very cathartic to see him get torn
He's
down.
no freedom fighter or hero.
No.
You know, he's horrible.
He wants the president, only has leverage, only has power. Only, you know.
He's cutting people's heads off and, you know, as you say, he's a tyrant.
He's a tyrant.
Yeah, essentially. So, you know, that moment is very, very powerful. But I think when you watch the end of it, you realize that the president isn't heroic, you know. So I think it's it's complex because
it is.
It's not, you know, in the moment it's satisfying, but when you think about it afterwards, it's like no, the president is no hero.
No.
But it is interesting that Donald Pleasance had experienced, I believe, was in a Japanese internment camp or a prisoner. I think he was a prisoner of war in World War II, and it actually could draw on some of his own experiences
of the torture
of being tortured
prisoner
and things like that.
Yeah.
So you know, there's
that scene. I really feel his pain there, even though I don't love him. You know?
It's powerful.
It is.
This movie's powerful, but it's also not. You know, it's not
ramming
like
down
black
your
and
throat,
white either. You know, in the
Yeah.
sense of in a moral sense, all of these characters are some of them are straight up evil, but some of them are shades of grey. We don't know what Maggie did or what Brain. We know that Brain, I guess, and Snake were involved in that job with Fresno Bob, of course. Pour one out for Fresno Bob.
Yeah, pour one out for Fresno.
Who got screwed over by Harold.
Don't call me Harold.
But, you know, I mean, are we going to talk about Maggie, by the way? Like, what a character.
Yeah, what a character.
Holy
Can we?
cow.
Can we? Go ahead.
I
She's
love
amazing. I love how you're saying everyone has their textures and their nuances. And I love Adrienne Barbeau. Another Carpenter vet. And were they married?
Yes.
They were, right? And she's so good in this. And it's good to have some tough females. And I think what you said earlier, like the world's so weird and you can buy all these personalities arising because there's whatever they had to do to survive.
Absolutely.
In this horrible dystopian nightmare that they're in just to survive. You know, and Cabby is like the positive. He has the childlike wonder. He's been driving the cab for years and years and years. He's like the blue collar guy, you know, and he goes to the show at night. And then he's like, "Oh, I would never be around out here at night, Snake. You know, it's bad." And then he helps him and he throws the Molotov cocktail. He's like, "These things are like gold around here, but I'm going to use one on you to get out of here because I like you." And there's this wonder about him. And when he passes, I feel like it's such a sad passing. Obviously, you only have so many characters that you have to, have a few blood sacrifices for the sake of an action film. Can't have everyone get out scot-free, but I really love Ernst Borgnine as Cabby, and I feel like him foiling Brain, like you said, very matter of fact, very
natural.
Yeah. I mean, also like acting style of Harry Dean Stanton. Ernst Borgnine is he's almost larger than life. I like that his name is actually Cabby. So apparently the original script didn't have a lot of the humor.
Right.
And they brought in Nick Castle. Yep. So shout out to Nick Castle, who's, played Michael Myers in the original, Halloween, and he's big. He's also in the band.
Of course, the Coupe de Villes.
The Coupe de Villes, thank you. The name is
Yep.
Yeah, and so apparently it's funny because I keep coming back to like this was a fun movie. We wanted to do a fun movie to get away from the heaviness of the fires. Right. We landed on a dystopian nightmare. About unchecked state power.
Right.
But they are both.
But it is fun.
It is fun. There are so many funny moments. There's so much humor. And Carpenter really sticks up for it and says that Nick Castle like single-handedly like did a rewrite and made it a lot funnier. You know?
And that stuff with the going to the show,
Yes.
you know, that's which is logical that the prisoners would have a kind of artistic output, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's very clever, it's very funny, but there's also a sort of sadness to it that like they find some need for artistic expression and put on their own show, and people go see it because it's like this microcosm of society. I mean, it's totally fucked and damned and broken, but there's still some human spirit left in that world.
The human spirit does prevail,
you know,
no
even if it is in a really weird and dysfunctional way.
And wasn't there a song about the police being?
They're like, The song is sort of about rampant criminality. I think, but again, it's just the idea of like there are all these different ice cream flavors that Snake licks throughout the film, and you know, and Ernest Borgnine comes in with a totally different energy because he's so sort of big-hearted and lovable. The second you see him, and he's got this wide-eyed glee on his face as he's watching the show, you just can't help but love.
You can't help but love the guy.
But I love, going back to Maggie for a second, what I think is really cool about that is that she's the muscle in that dynamic.
She is.
Brain doesn't, when they're getting like harassed on the very Heart of Darkness like sequence where they're going down Broadway and they're having arrows fired at them and that sort of thing. And people grab it at Brain. He's like, Maggie, you know, and she has to deal with it and shoot them. And at one point, I think he gives the gun to Brain and he gives it to Maggie. Because Brain is the brain.
He's the brain. She's the brawn.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's something really kind of cool and progressive about that. The woman is the protector. She's sort of that Amazonian, fantasy figure, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, and he's sort of looks like a poet. You know, he's got the little cravat and he's, fancies himself as an intellectual.
Sits in his armchair.
You know, and he's the thinker, right? So these things are they're such amazing characters, and the actors are so great, and they're so dialed into the tone, but they also imbue this world, as outlandish as it is, with a real kind of earthy reality that makes you buy everything you're seeing.
Yeah. And then setting them, I've known this for a while, but by watching the making of, but shooting it in St. Louis, which in 1977, I think 3 years before they went to film, was a terrible fire, and chunks of the city were just burnt to a crisp. And so they only had $6 million, and they needed to have these huge, sweeping shots. And it's before a lot of, before computer could do it. And they used some matte painting. Apparently, James Cameron actually painted some of the New York skyline.
That's right.
Literally right around the.
Yep. It's an amazing photo of him doing it.
Yeah. And then you had New World Pictures doing the models of, he had to land the hang glider on land the glider on the the top of the World Trade Center. But these shots of what was St. Louis, and they were able to shoot at night and get away with it, and just have these, to build this desolate hellscape. Yeah. And in my opinion, it really becomes a character of the film in itself. And really does set that starkness, and it's really viable.
Oh yeah,
and it's so striking.
And some people have maybe criticized the movie because it doesn't feel like the New York, that we know. But first of all, that's impossible. Second of all, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And third, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
And third, don't call me Harold.
They had $5 million. What do you want? So it was clever. I think it was really clever.
Yeah,
and this is not. This is a New York that's been
This isn't the New York that you've come
destroyed.
to love. Yeah.
For all we know, in this war that's going on off screen, New York was attacked.
Right.
We don't know.
And that's why they were like, well, we already got this desolate spot. It's already been destroyed. It doesn't function as a city. And I like that. I never thought of that. That's really smart.
How fascinating it would be as a prequel. And this is, I would love to write this.
I love it.
How this process took place. For example, at what point do they decide, the president or the governor and what's going on to decide that this is going to happen? And then how could you possibly empty New York of citizens? What kind of a massive, presumably military, martial law type, mass what would you call it? A kind of eviction
Right.
of an entire metropolis
of millions and millions
right?
of people.
And then to build, and how that would work, and what did people say about it, and what were,
how did it go down in the media?
The whatever preceded it would be a fascinating movie.
That's interesting. Yeah, to get to that dire strait, to be what. So okay, well, we were established in the opening voiceover by Jamie Lee that crime was so bad that we basically had to do this. So there was the Machiavellian ends justify the means, but that's all well and good, and it gives us so much in a sentence or two. It's like, okay, we're here now. Boom, we're moving on. But yeah, it would be so cool to see the kind of breakdown of society to the point where it had to get to that level. Did they say, oh, let's just use New York, it's got a lot of water around it, if we dam it up, mine it up, it's perfect? Or, like you said, was there an attack? It was already broken, destroyed. Then we pulled out the survivors. How did that go down? I mean, New York is a beloved city. It represents liberty, the Statue of Liberty, which obviously makes it the most poetic to have the president get stuck there and, in this hellscape. But yeah, man, I think there's a lot on the bone to be chewed still there that could be a lot of fun. And I think it works because it is so focused. Especially in the first installment, we can do an Escape from LA podcast. I've only seen it one time actually. That one.
Yeah, it's a tricky one to talk about because it's so. I gather that the budget was absolutely decimated days before they shot it,
yeah.
and so it's unfortunately not at the quality level of this movie. Even though there's some great ideas in it, and it's still fun.
Yeah.
And there's some great actors as part of that cast, and there's some fun stuff in it, but it's not as. There's also the worst CGI I've ever seen.
Yeah, it doesn't age too well.
In some of the sequences.
Whereas I feel like this movie, the effects age really well, because I think the more you can do in camera, the more you can do with actual practical. For me, that always ages better. And even some of the CG in the late aughts, it's the last time you saw it, it was part of the vernacular of the time, and that's how things looked. But looking at it now, even just 15 years ago,
we did Air Force One and looked at some of the aerial stuff, and it's atrocious.
Yeah.
And you'd think that's a hugely expensive movie,
right?
And some of the aerial shots in that look like from a 1999 PlayStation game. Siphon Filter.
Siphon Filter, nice. Love that one. The guy runs funny, right?
Steven Seagal run.
Kind of a wall to waddle. Yeah. Oh man. Well, I love it. Well, who do we talk to get cracking on the prequel?
Yeah,
we got to get Phil Gawthorne
good question.
On writing.
Yeah. Well, there has been rumors, for over the years of that they were going to remake it, or there was also talk that was really interesting that there was going to be a sequel that was Escape from Earth. Which never came. I mean, the commercial and critical failure of Escape from LA, I think, kind of poisons the well to some extent. Although I would still love to see Kurt, back in the eye patch, no matter whatever age he is. He could still kick ass.
I would too.
But there's been talk. I remember at one point Timothy Oliphant was attached to play Snake in one iteration. There was another version where it was Gerard Butler. The last I believe Robert Rodriguez was once involved in a remake, and then the last I heard was the chap who did Luther, who created Luther, whose name escapes me, a fantastic writer. That he was doing a version of it, but it sort of says a lot that in this age of desperation for IP and all of that, they haven't done it, because it's
requels.
Hey, this ain't as easy to do as it looks, as we're discovering. There is so much complexity and skill, and it was kind of a, lightning in a bottle moment. So this.
I wouldn't want to see it, to be honest.
I mean,
I'd like
I'd
to see
be
a
curious.
Sequel. A sequel or prequel would be cool.
Yeah.
A remake. I mean, I'm going. I'm whipped. You got me. So you win. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna pay to go see it. But I don't know. I guess I like that this one hasn't been remade.
Yeah. And Ghosts of Mars as well also has Escape from New York DNA. The character's called Desolation Jones, the Ice Cube character, I think is his name, and he's very Snake Plissken / Napoleon, that type
Right.
of character, and it's sort of, and he's a badass criminal and everything, but that movie's a little bit incoherent, even though I really dig the
some moments.
opening and the music, the
Yeah.
track.
Dude,
I
can we
dig
just talk
that.
about Carpenter on score for a minute?
Yeah.
So even this one,
We should talk about the music.
I think
for
that
sure.
the music in this one, for a dystopian nightmare hellscape movie, there are so many bleak. Obviously, you're going with the synths of John Carpenter. I can't wait to see him again live. Just got my ticket. I'm going Halloween night. But anyway, I saw him in. You said you saw him too.
I did.
18. It was just pure magic. But
It was.
so John Carpenter, the director, John Carpenter, the writer, and John Carpenter, the scorer.
Yeah.
And I think this movie has so many bleak moments where, I think 1 year later in The Thing, these kind of dissonant tones, harmonious moments. I know we had
that was Morricone. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You could feel the
for
feel
sure.
the Carpenter contribution
For
for sure. But this one, you get those moments, but then you get these like, ding, 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 ding. You get the fun.
Well, it's the fun. Yeah.
Yeah, the fun is in the DNA, even
Yeah.
of the music.
Yeah.
You're like, this is fun.
Yeah.
And it is.
Yeah.
And it's so good.
It's interesting how he made some movies. The Thing is sort of in some ways is not fun. The Thing is almost it's fun to watch, but the mood of the movie is so oppressive.
Yeah.
And the ending is so is so bleak.
Bad guys win.
But this, and he's done films that are a bit more, I would say, Halloween's pretty aggressive. Although there's fun in that movie, and Prince of Darkness is really aggressive in its kind of nihilism. But this one, it does have that levity that you need, because I think if it was just without the Borgnine, without the this sort of weird breeziness of a film that's sort of in an awful dystopia, it probably wouldn't. RoboCop's the same as well. Like RoboCop's fun, but it's the world. The world is the worst world in ever, or Total Recall or Running Man. These films that posit a dystopian or crypto-fascist world. But yet there's still some way that these movies are delightful to watch, and you kind of need.
And again, we were
that,
like, we need a fun one. We were, talking, and we were both like, escape.
Well, Falling Down's realism. Falling Down is a
Yes.
realistic drama.
I love that.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's not. This is still genre, right? So
Yeah,
it's still through the prism of genre.
There's still a larger-than-lifeness
It's
of
just
it.
that we're dealing with, in a real world, some of the themes. So it's a bit uncomfortable. We're dealing with authoritarianism and things like that.
So and we're looking at possibly crazy tariffs coming our way. Everyone's starting to hoard again, like 2020.
Yeah.
Get that toilet paper, Phil. Stockpile it.
Well, anyway, I don't know. On a lighter note, with the score. There's a couple of bits. The score's also quite eclectic in its own way, even though it feels consistent. Like my favorite cue in the movie, although the opening theme is amazing, but it's the bit where they realize they're like trying to scramble the code of what the plane is, and they realize it's Air Force One, and the music kicks in, and it's like a different. It's got this great pulse to it, this great pace to it. And it's like, wow, this movie is exciting. And then there's some bits of it that are slow and atmospheric and almost like a zombie movie, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But then the bit towards the end where it's like the race to get off the bridge, there's like a steel drum in there, and it's like...
right. It's kind of fun again. Yeah, a little Caribbean.
So, yes, I mean...
Absolutely, man.
He is the man.
He's the man, dude. I love this guy, and I know you do. And my love continues to just deepen and widen, as if I thought it could possibly do so. It just continues. I literally was almost in tears at a couple moments watching this movie that I literally have seen more than 20 times.
Yeah,
I know it in my gut. I've seen this movie a lot, and I had it on DVD for a while. I got the Blu-ray. Now I have a 4K download of it. It looks great. I saw it, actually, speaking of, it was a doubleheader with Total Recall in 23 at the New Beverly in 35. It was my first time seeing it in 35. It was that and then Total Recall, 1990. And just, what a great doubleheader. And I called it the Cab doubleheader because of the.
The Johnny Cab.
Johnny Cab. Robert Picardo, Star Trek vet. But yeah, I mean, there's just something about his movies, and we can talk about them to death. But there's something that goes beyond words. That's just the je ne sais quoi of him, and they're just infinitely watchable.
And like you're saying, if I could, to make a film that is still cool as fuck 44 years later and is still relevant and has a real punch to it and is still not only as a awesome movie experience and is super entertaining, but is actually saying something about human nature and society. Like, I mean, that's got to be the goal.
You've done it. You win. Yeah. No, he literally says it like, let's give it a little time. The test of time is the true test. We just lost David Lynch. That was a really terrible blow. But so many other filmmakers came out and said, we'd all be so lucky to have the impact that this guy has had, and the legacy that, and I think that's why we love film. There's an immortality to it.
Yeah. No one lives forever, but film does.
No one lives forever, but film does. Unless it's silver nitrate and exploded or burnt. Anyway, there's an effort to restore all those. Save what we have left. But who knows in 100 years if we'll still be watching movies. I will. But I know you will.
If they're this good.
If they're this good.
Then yeah.
Oh my goodness. That is so good. I kind of want to end there because that's hilarious. Yeah, is there anything else you want to raise or anything you want to ask me?
I don't think so. You covered it all.
Yeah, I think we did it,
thanks for having me back. The two shows I'm involved with are Die Hard on a Blank and 48 Hours of Buddy Movies. If if that sounded of interest to you, please check them out and check out Andy's episode about Star Trek First Contact on Die Hard on a Blank. And come one, come all.
It's
building
so good,
a nice
guys.
community
it's
as
so
well.
Good. You guys are such a great show. I love it.
And we have interaction on the Patreon as well, where we have a whole comment section and we engage with people, which will be exciting when we do Big Trouble in Little China and all these classic movies that mean so much to people. And that's all I got, man. Dude,
Phil Gawthorne, screenwriter, podcaster, two podcasts going on right now. Do you have any time? Do you have a kid too?
I don't know. I don't have too much time. No, I don't. But that's more because of my son.
Yeah.
Bless his heart.
Bless his heart. Soon he'll be watching movies. You can sit him down and he can just sit there and we can write while he sits and catches up on the classics.
I hope so. Teach him about Snake Plissken and a great role model for kids.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. All right, here's your eye patch, son. Well, Phil, I really can't thank you enough for coming. I love you, buddy, and I just think you're the man. And keep on keeping on, and to more collaborations with you, sir.
Thank you, Andy. It's been a delight to be back here, and this has been a real pleasure. You started me off on this journey, and it's still going, and it's good to have a voice. You know what I mean? Like, it's nice to have a voice, especially at the moment, and
yes.
And to be kind to everybody,
be kind guys.
To each other.
Yeah,
and,
we're all going through a lot, and you don't know what the other person's going through, and it's on a good day. It's tough right now. Not the way we want to start 25, but here's to an awesome year, and I think we're picking up the pieces and we're getting stronger. But yeah, it feels good. Focus on what you love, and let the rest all go.
Amen.